The Galactic War Council chamber with a massive sphere floating in the void between stars. Representatives from 17 different species sat in tiered rows, their forms ranging from crystalline beings that sparkled like living gems to massive creatures covered in armored plates. At the center of it all, a holographic display showed battlefield data that made even the bravest warriors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Commander Vex ADH of the Zorvian Empire stood before them, his forearms trembling slightly as he prepared to deliver his report. The Zorvians were known across the galaxy as master strategists, their analytical minds capable of processing combat data at speeds that left other species in awe. But today, even Vex ADH seemed shaken. Honored members of the War Council, he began, his voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. We have completed our analysis of the human military forces, specifically their elite units known as Marines. A murmur rippled through the assembly. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Most species had dismissed them as another primitive race that would either fall in line or be conquered. How wrong they had been. Our initial assessments suggested humans were physically inferior to most galactic species, Vex ADH continued. They lacked the natural armor of the Kronak, the enhanced senses of the Sci-Fi, or the regenerative abilities of the Morzak. However, our battlefield data tells a very different story. The holographic display shifted, showing a human Marine in standard combat armor. The figure looked almost laughably small compared to the massive Kronak warrior displayed beside it for scale. Several representatives actually chuckled at the comparison. Do not be deceived by their appearance, Vex ADH warned, his tone sharp enough to silence the laughter. What you see before you is perhaps the most effective killing machine the galaxy has ever produced. Ambassador Threk of the Kronak Federation slammed a massive fist on his podium. Impossible. My warriors are 3 times their size and strength. We have conquered 100 worlds. Vex ADH's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or fear. Shall I show you the footage from Kepler 442b, Ambassador? Where a single squad of 12 human Marines held off an entire Kronak battalion for 72 hours. The chamber fell silent. The Battle of Kepler 442b was supposed to have been classified, a shameful defeat the Kronak had tried desperately to hide. What do you know about that? Threk growled, his scales flushing a deep red. Because the humans broadcasted it, Vex ADH replied simply. They call it psychological warfare. They want their enemies to know what they're capable of. The display changed again, showing combat footage from various encounters with human forces. Marines moved with a fluid coordination that seemed almost telepathic, their weapons firing in perfect synchronized patterns that left no gaps in their coverage. We've identified several factors that make human Marines so effective, Vex ADH explained. First, their evolutionary history. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world with unusually high gravity and diverse predators. They can track prey for days without rest, their endurance far exceeding any other known sapient species. The footage showed a Marine unit pursuing fleeing Sci-Fi scouts through a jungle environment. The agile Sci-Fi, with their superior speed and climbing abilities, gradually slowed from exhaustion. The humans just kept coming, their pace steady and relentless. Second, their psychology. Humans possess something they call pack bonding. They form intense emotional connections, not just with their own species, but with anything they work alongside. A human Marine will die without hesitation to save their squad mates. More disturbing, they will do the same for allied alien forces they've served with, even species that would never show them the same loyalty. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably. The idea of sacrificing oneself for another species was virtually unheard of in galactic politics. Third, their adaptability. Humans originated from a world with wildly varying climates and environments. Desert, Arctic, jungle, mountain, ocean, they've evolved to survive in all of them. Most species require extensive environmental suits to operate outside their comfort zones. Humans treat it as a minor inconvenience. The display showed Marines operating in environments that would kill most other species within minutes. Toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, high radiation. The humans pushed through it all with minimal protection. But perhaps most terrifying of all, Vex-80H paused, letting the tension build, is their creativity in warfare. Every species in this council follows established military doctrines thousands of years old. Humans. They improvise. They adapt. They create new tactics on the fly that our strategic computers can't predict. The footage changed to show a Marine unit trapped in an urban environment, surrounded by superior numbers. Instead of surrendering or making a futile last stand, the Marines had somehow turned the entire city block into a massive trap, using improvised explosives created from civilian materials to collapse buildings onto their enemies. This brings us to the kill ratios, Vex-80H said, and the chamber seemed to hold its collective breath. We've analyzed data from every military engagement involving human Marines in the past decade. The numbers are disturbing. The holographic display filled with statistics, graphs, and charts. As the representatives began to process the information, sounds of shock and disbelief echoed through the chamber. Against Kronak forces, the average kill ratio is 47-1, Vex-80H announced. Each Marine kills an average of 47 Kronak warriors before being neutralized. Threk's roar of outrage was drowned out as Vex-80H continued. Against Silithai scouts, 63-1. Against more Zak regenerators, 38-1. Against our own Zorvian tactical units, 55-1. The list continued, each species' military forces showing similar devastating ratios. But Vex-80H wasn't done. These numbers represent Standard Marines. We've also encountered their Special Forces units. Navy SEALs, Force Recon, Delta Force, SIS. He paused, his four arms gesturing helplessly. The kill ratios for these units are so high our computers flag them as statistical errors. One SEAL team on Proxima 3 eliminated over 300 enemy combatants without taking a single casualty. High Counselor Sijvara of the Etherian Collective finally spoke, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. How is this possible? They're just one species newly emerged. We have the combined military might of 17 civilizations. That assumption, Vex-80H replied, is precisely why we're losing. We think in terms of species. Humans think in terms of individuals. Each Marine is trained to be self-sufficient, to think independently, to adapt instantly. Our forces follow rigid command structures. When you eliminate a Kronak commander, the unit falls apart. When you eliminate a human commander, the next Marine in line takes charge without missing a beat. Kill that one, and the next step's up. This continues down to the last soldier. The display showed footage of exactly this scenario. A Marine unit under heavy fire, their lieutenant killed in the opening salvo. Without any visible communication, a sergeant took command. When she fell, a corporal stepped up. The unit never stopped fighting, never lost cohesion. Furthermore, Vex-80H continued, humans have a disturbing ability to weaponize anything. We've seen them turn mining equipment into artillery, repurpose medical scanners into targeting systems, and convert terraforming bacteria into biological weapons. Their military doctrine includes something called field expedient solutions, essentially making weapons out of whatever is available. Ambassador Kretok of the Vorthan hegemony spoke up, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. Surely their technology must be far superior to ours. That would explain these ratios. That's what makes this truly terrifying, Vex-80H replied. Human technology is, at best, on par with ours. In many areas, it's actually inferior. Their ships are slower, their energy weapons less powerful, their shield weaker. But they compensate with tactics, training, and sheer determination. The footage now showed a space battle where a human destroyer, outgunned and outnumbered, had somehow managed to destroy 3 larger enemy vessels. The human ship had used its own damaged sections as improvised kinetic weapons, launching debris at enemy ships while using unpredictable thrust patterns that no sane pilot would attempt. We must also address their medical technology, VEX-80H added. While not superior to ours in raw capability, humans have militarized their medical response to an unprecedented degree. They have something called combat medics, soldiers trained to provide emergency medical care under fire. A wounded human Marine has a 78% chance of returning to combat within days. Our forces average less than 30%. The display showed human medics working on wounded Marines while under heavy fire, using their own bodies to shield patients while performing complex medical procedures. It was a level of battlefield medicine that most species had never even considered. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect, VEX-80H's voice dropped lower, is what happens when you actually manage to kill a human Marine. Their comrades don't retreat. They don't panic. They become angry. The words seemed inadequate, but the footage that followed illustrated the point perfectly. A Marine squad that had lost one of their members pursuing the enemy with a fury that transcended rational military objectives. They had tracked the killers for 3 days across hostile terrain, eliminated them, and then continued to hunt down every member of that enemy unit. Humans have a concept called vengeance, VEX-80H explained. When you kill one of their pack-bonded companions, they take it personally. Every Marine in that unit will make it their mission to eliminate whoever was responsible. And they will not stop. Ever. The chamber had fallen completely silent now, the weight of the information settling over the representatives like a shroud. These weren't the primitive apes they had expected to easily conquer or contain. These were apex predators who had turned warfare into an art form. In conclusion, VEX-80H said, his tone heavy with implication, if we continue our current military strategies against humanity, our projections show total defeat within 3 galactic standard years. And that's the optimistic estimate. High Counselor Sejvara pulsed rapidly, a sign of extreme distress among her species. Then, what do you recommend, Commander? Surely you're not suggesting we surrender to a single species? No, VEX-80H replied carefully. But I am suggesting we radically reconsider our approach. The humans have a saying, if you can't beat them, join them. Perhaps it's time we consider diplomacy instead of conquest. The uproar that followed shook the chamber. 17 species who had built their civilizations on military dominance, being told to negotiate with primitives? It was unthinkable. But in the back of many minds, the numbers lingered. 47-1. 63-1. Special forces units with ratios too high to calculate. And somewhere in the void, human Marines continued their training, preparing for whatever the galaxy might throw at them next. Because that was what humans did. They adapted. They overcame. They survived. And, as the War Council would soon learn, they did it better than anyone else in the known universe. 3 weeks had passed since Commander VEX-80H delivered his report to the Galactic War Council. The debate had raged for days, with some calling for immediate total war against humanity while others advocated for diplomatic solutions. In the end, pride won over pragmatism. The Council voted to launch a decisive strike against the human colonies, believing that overwhelming force would succeed where smaller engagements had failed. They chose Olympus Station as their target. It was a human military outpost on the edge of their space, far from Earth and supposedly vulnerable. The Council assembled the largest fleet in galactic history, over 3,000 vessels from all 17 member species. Surely, they reasoned, no amount of human ingenuity could overcome such odds. Admiral Zarkon of the Kronak Federation commanded the armada from his flagship, the Inevitable Victory. As the massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Olympus Station, he expected to find a panicked human force preparing for evacuation. Instead, they found something else entirely. Sir, his tactical officer reported, confusion evident in his voice. The station appears to be broadcasting music? Indeed it was. Across all communication channels, the human station was transmitting something they would later learn was called Ride of the Valkyries. But there was something else, too. A simple text message repeating on all frequencies. Welcome to the party. Colonel Sarah Reaper, Chin, Commander, 3rd Marine Division, Zarkon snorted. Human bravado. All ships, Prepare for bombardment. We'll reduce that station to atoms. But as the fleet moved into attack formation, tactical officers across dozens of bridges began reporting anomalies. Strange energy readings from the asteroid field surrounding the station. Unusual heat signatures from what should have been empty space. And the human station itself showed far more power generation than a facility its size should possess. "Admiral," the science officer called out, "I'm detecting numerous artificial structures hidden throughout the asteroid field. The humans, they've turned the entire system into a fortress." Before Zarkon could respond, space itself seemed to come alive with violence. Hidden weapon platforms, carefully disguised as asteroids, opened fire simultaneously. Not with the energy weapons most species favored, but with primitive kinetic weapons, railguns that launch projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The first salvo tore through dozens of ships before their shields could adjust to the unexpected attack vector. Then, the Marines launched their assault pods. "Incoming craft," the tactical officer shouted. Hundreds, no, thousands of small vessels launching from concealed positions. The assault pods were barely larger than shuttles, each carrying a squad of Marines. They should have been easy targets for the fleet's point defense systems. But the humans had learned from every previous engagement. The pods moved in seemingly random patterns, their trajectories calculated by algorithms that adapted in real time to defensive fire. For every pod destroyed, 3 more seemed to get through. And then they started hitting the ships. On the bridge of the Silithai cruiser Swift Strike, Captain Velmar watched in horror as human Marines burned through the hull with plasma cutters. His ship had the most advanced internal security systems in the fleet, but the humans had come prepared. They used electromagnetic pulse grenades to disable defensive turrets, chemical weapons that corroded Silithai breathing apparatus, and tactical movements that seemed to anticipate every defensive measure. "They're not trying to capture the ship," his security chief reported desperately. "They're heading for the reactor core." Similar reports came from ships throughout the fleet. The Marines weren't following conventional boarding tactics. They weren't trying to seize control of bridges or capture key personnel. They were turning the ships themselves into weapons. On the inevitable victory, Admiral Zarkon watched his grand fleet being torn apart from within. "All ships, emergency protocols. Vent the affected sections into space." "Sir," his aide responded, "the humans, they're wearing full EVA gear under their combat armor. Venting the compartments isn't stopping them." The human Marines had anticipated this tactic. Their armor was designed for extended operations in vacuum, with magnetic boots that let them move along the exterior of ships as easily as the interior. Venting them into space just meant they could cut through the hull somewhere else. Then, Colonel Chen's voice cut through the chaos on all channels. "Admiral Zarkon, this is Colonel Chun. I'm offering you one chance to surrender. You have 60 seconds to comply." "Never," Zarkon roared. "All ships, concentrate fire on the station. Destroy it." But even as hundreds of ships turned their weapons toward Olympus Station, something impossible happened. The station moved. "That's not possible," the science officer whispered. "A structure that size can't have engines capable of." His words were cut off as Olympus Station demonstrated exactly what human engineers could accomplish when they decided the laws of physics were more like guidelines. The entire station had been built around a massive fusion drive array, hidden beneath layers of armor and false sensor readings. It accelerated at rates that should have torn it apart, dodging the incoming fire while its own weapons, revealed now as the facade fell away, returned fire with devastating accuracy. But the real surprise was yet to come. "Sir," the communication officer's voice was barely a whisper, "I'm detecting massive FTL signatures. Ships dropping out of hyperspace. It's the human fleet." The human fleet that the Council's intelligence had assured them was too far away to respond. The human fleet that was supposedly scattered across a dozen systems. The human fleet that had somehow traveled faster than should have been possible. 200 human warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, already firing as they transitioned to normal space. But these weren't the cobbled-together vessels the Council had expected from a young spacefaring race. These were purpose-built instruments of war, incorporating every lesson learned from previous engagements. Admiral Marie Du Bois commanded the human fleet from the USS Prometheus. She opened a channel to the alien armada. "This is Admiral Du Bois of the United Earth Navy. Your fleet is surrounded, your ships are compromised, and your defeat is inevitable. This is your final opportunity to surrender." But the true horror was revealed when tactical analysis of the new arrivals came through. Each human ship carried a full complement of Marines. Fresh troops, ready to join the boarding actions already in progress. The kill ratios that had terrified the Council were about to be demonstrated on a massive scale. "Admiral," Zarkon Zaid reported, his voice breaking, "17% of our fleet has already been neutralized. Internal security reports Marine squads on 40% of remaining vessels. Casualty projections are, I can see the projections." Zarkon snarled. They were catastrophic. At current rates, the entire armada would be eliminated within hours. The greatest fleet in galactic history, defeated by a force less than a tenth its size. On the human flagship, Admiral Du Bois turned to her Marine commander, General Thompson. "Your people are performing admirably, General." Thompson, a grizzled veteran with more scars than most species accumulated in a lifetime, simply nodded. "They're Marines, Admiral. This is what we do." The battle, if it could even be called that anymore, continued to evolve in ways the alien fleet couldn't predict. Marine squads that had infiltrated enemy ships began using those ships' own weapons against their allies. Vessels thought secure suddenly opened fire on their neighbors, their command codes somehow compromised by human cyber warfare specialists. On the Zorvian Strategic Command ship, analysts watched their predictive models fail one after another. Every time they adapted to human tactics, the Marines switched to something new. It was as if they had an unlimited playbook of strategic options. "They're not following any known military doctrine," one analyst reported desperately. "Each unit is operating independently, choosing tactics based on immediate circumstances. Our centralized command structure can't respond quickly enough." That was the key insight that had made human Marines so effective. While other species had spent millennia perfecting rigid military hierarchies, humans had developed something called mission-type tactics. Give a Marine an objective and the tools to achieve it, then get out of their way. The result was a fighting force that could adapt faster than any enemy could respond. The boarding actions reached their crescendo as Marine squads achieved their objectives across the fleet. Some ships exploded as their reactors overloaded. Others simply went dark, their control systems irreparably destroyed. A few managed to eject their Marine infiltrators, only to be destroyed by the human fleet's conventional weapons. Through it all, the kill ratios held true. On ship after ship, small Marine units eliminated defending forces many times their size. They used the aliens' own ships against them, turning corridors into killing fields and using environmental controls to create advantages. When ammunition ran low, they improvised weapons from ship components. When faced with seemingly impossible odds, they found a way to win. The Morzak contingent had been confident in their regenerative abilities. Surely, they reasoned, humans couldn't maintain their kill ratios against warriors who could heal from almost any wound. They learned the hard way that Marines had studied their biology. White phosphorus grenades that burned hotter than their regeneration could handle. Targeted strikes to specific nerve clusters that paralyzed their healing factor. Combat drugs that turned their own regeneration against them, causing uncontrolled cellular growth that killed them from within. Every species' supposed advantage had been studied, analyzed, and countered. The Etherians' energy-based forms were disrupted by electromagnetic pulse weapons. The Vorthans' multiple redundant organs meant nothing when Marines used ammunition designed to fragment and cause maximum internal damage. The Kronak's legendary strength was useless when Marines refused to engage in close combat, instead using range and mobility to their advantage. But perhaps the most terrifying display came from a single Marine who would enter human military legend as the Ghost of Olympus. Sergeant Major David Ghost, Ramirez had been separated from his squad when their assault pod was hit by defensive fire. He'd managed to board a Sci-Fi destroyer alone, armed with only his standard loadout. Security footage recovered later showed what happened next. For 6 hours, Ramirez stalked through the ship like a predator. He eliminated security teams, sabotaged critical systems, and slowly worked his way toward the bridge. The Sci-Fi, despite their superior senses, couldn't track him. He used their own technology against them, creating false sensor echoes and using maintenance passages they had forgotten existed. When he finally reached the bridge, the 30 Sci-Fi defenders were ready for him. They had barricaded the entrances, set up overlapping fields of fire, and prepared for a frontal assault. Ramirez didn't give them one. Instead, he vented the surrounding compartments, forcing the defenders to seal the bridge. Then, he introduced a chemical compound into their air recycling system. Not lethal, but one that would react with Sci-Fi biology to cause temporary paralysis. Security footage showed him walking onto the bridge 15 minutes later, stepping over incapacitated defenders. He approached the captain, who was struggling to remain conscious. 43, Ramirez said simply. That's how many of your crew I've eliminated. I'm offering you a chance to save the rest. Surrender now, and I guarantee their safety. The captain, unable to speak, managed to activate the surrender beacon. Similar scenes played out across the fleet. Individual Marines or small units achieving impossible victories through a combination of training, determination, and sheer refusal to accept defeat. The kill ratios that VexADH had reported weren't statistical anomalies. They were the norm. 3 hours into the battle, Admiral Zarkon faced the reality of his situation. His Grand Armada was in ruins. Over half the ships were destroyed or captured. Marine boarding parties controlled key sections of his own flagship. The human fleet had suffered minimal casualties while inflicting devastating losses. All remaining ships, he broadcast on an open channel, his voice heavy with defeat, stand down. We surrender. The guns fell silent. Across the battlefield, Marine units received the ceasefire order and smoothly transitioned from combat to prisoner control. They treated their defeated enemies with professional courtesy, providing medical aid and ensuring their safety. It was a stark contrast to the devastation they had just inflicted. Colonel Chin's voice came over the communications system. Admiral Zarkon, your surrender is accepted. Prepare to receive boarding parties for formal transfer of control. Any resistance will be met with immediate resumption of hostilities. As Marine shuttles approached the surviving ships, the true scope of the defeat became clear. The greatest military force ever assembled by the Galactic Council had been defeated by a human force a fraction of its size. The kill ratios hadn't just held. In many cases, they had been exceeded. On the human flagship, Admiral Du Bois reviewed the casualty reports. They had lost 12 ships and roughly 300 Marines. The enemy had lost over 1,800 vessels and casualties in the hundreds of thousands. It was the kind of victory that should have been impossible. Signal Earth, she told her communications officer. Tell them the Council has received our message. That message was simple but profound. Humanity would not be conquered. They would not be contained. They could be partners or they could be enemies, but they would never be victims. In the aftermath of the battle, as prisoner transfers began and salvage operations commenced, one fact became crystal clear to every species present. The kill ratios weren't just numbers on a report. They were a promise, a warning, and they were only going to get worse. 6 months after the disaster at Olympus Station, the Galactic War Council convened for an emergency session. This time, there was no bravado, no posturing, no claims of superiority. The representatives sat in subdued silence as High Counselor Sachvara called the meeting to order. We are here, she began, her crystalline form dim with stress, to discuss the human question. As you all know, following our defeat at Olympus, humanity has offered terms for peace. We must decide whether to accept them or... She paused, the alternative too terrible to voice. Commander VexADH stood once again before the council, but this time he was not alone. Beside him stood a figure that made several representatives instinctively reach for weapons they weren't carrying. A human marine in full combat armor, weapon mag-locked to her back, standing at parade rest with perfect stillness. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Park," Vex 80H announced. "She is here as military attaché from the human government." They insisted on having a representative present for these discussions. The Marine said nothing, her face hidden behind the polarized visor of her helmet. But her mere presence changed the entire dynamic of the room. Every representative knew the statistics. Any one human Marine could, statistically, eliminate dozens of them before being stopped. And this one was standing in the heart of their power. "The humans' terms are simple," Vex 80H continued. "Full diplomatic recognition, trade agreements, military non-aggression pacts, and, most importantly, they want a seat on this council." "Preposterous." Ambassador Threx slammed his fist on his podium, though with noticeably less force than before. "We cannot allow a single species to dictate terms to the entire galaxy." The Marine shifted slightly, just enough to face Threx directly. She still said nothing, but somehow the silence was more unnerving than any threat. "Perhaps," suggested Ambassador Kreetalk, his 6 eyes darting nervously between Vex 80H and the Marine, "we should hear the full proposal before making any decisions." Vex 80H activated the holographic display. "Since Olympus Station, the humans have not been idle. Our intelligence suggests they've increased their military production by 300%. They're also implementing something they call the Marine Exchange Program." The display showed human Marines training alongside various alien military forces. Not the Council members' forces. These were independent species who had chosen to ally with humanity rather than face them as enemies. The Qualari Republic was the first to sign a mutual defense treaty with Earth, Vex 80H explained. Human Marines trained their soldiers, shared tactical knowledge, and helped redesign their military doctrine. The result? The Qualari recently repelled a Vorthan raid with 0 casualties while inflicting total losses on the attackers. The Vorthan representatives' 6 eyes blinked rapidly in agitation. "That raid was classified. How do you—" "The humans share the intelligence," Vex 80H interrupted. "They've been quite generous with information about Council members' military activities, particularly those that violate our own laws regarding attacks on non-member species." The implications hung heavy in the air. Humanity wasn't just offering peace. They were demonstrating that they had intelligence networks throughout Council space and weren't afraid to use that information. "There's more," Vex 80H continued. "The humans have been developing new technologies specifically designed to counter each of our species' advantages. Shall I show you the specifications for their new Chronac Buster ammunition? Or perhaps their energy-dampening fields designed to neutralize Etherian forms? They're developing weapons specifically to kill us." High Counselor S.H. Vara's form flickered with alarm. For the first time, the Marine spoke. Her voice was calm, professional, and somehow more terrifying for its reasonableness. "We prefer to think of it as insurance, High Counselor. We've learned that the galaxy respects strength. We're simply ensuring we maintain enough strength to be respected." "You speak of respect," Ambassador Velmar of the Silithai hissed, "yet you hold a blade to our throats." "With respect, Ambassador," Sergeant Park replied, "we didn't start this conflict. We've been defending ourselves since the moment we achieved FTL travel. Every attack on human colonies, every attempted invasion, every act of aggression, we remember them all. The fact that we're offering peace instead of retaliation should tell you everything about our intentions." The display changed, showing footage from various human colonies. Not military installations, but civilian settlements. Schools where human children learned alongside young aliens from allied species. Markets where traders from dozens of worlds exchanged goods. Medical facilities where human doctors treated injuries regardless of species. "This is what humanity offers," Vex 80H said. "Partnership, progress, mutual benefit. They don't want to conquer the galaxy. They want to improve it." "And if we refuse?" asked Counselor Seitvara. The Marine's helmet turned toward her. "Then, we'll continue to defend ourselves." And based on our current kill ratios, how long do you think the Council will survive a prolonged conflict? The silence that followed was deafening. Every representative was doing the same calculation. If the kill ratios held, and there was no reason to believe they wouldn't, humanity could eliminate the combined military forces of the Council while suffering minimal losses. And that was with their current technology. Who knew what they would develop given time and motivation? There's one more factor to consider, Vex-ADH added. The humans have been in contact with species outside Council space. The Terminus Confederacy, the Sagittarius Alliance, the Outer Rim Collective, all have expressed interest in formal relations with Earth. If we refuse this peace offer, humanity won't be isolated. They'll have allies. Many allies. The political implications were staggering. The Council had maintained its dominance by being the only major power in known space. If humanity formed a competing alliance, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Ambassador Threk, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. What guarantees do we have that humanity won't use their military superiority to dominate the Council if we give them a seat? Sergeant Park reached up and removed her helmet, revealing a face that was surprisingly young. Her eyes, though, held the weight of someone who had seen too much combat. Ambassador, if we wanted to dominate you, we would have done it already. After Olympus Station, we could have pressed our advantage. Your fleets were scattered, your morale broken. Instead, we offered peace. She paused, making eye contact with each representative in turn. Humans have a saying, the best warrior is one who never has to fight. We don't want to be your conquerors. We want to be your partners. But make no mistake, she continued, her voice hardening slightly, we will never again allow ourselves to be seen as prey. Every human child learns about the attacks on our early colonies. Every Marine takes an oath to ensure it never happens again. You can have us as allies or as enemies. Choose wisely. The debate that followed lasted hours. Some representatives argued for continued resistance, convinced that human dominance could somehow be prevented. Others pointed out the futility of opposing a species that had turned warfare into such a precise science. Finally, High Counselor Sejvara called for order. We will vote, all in favor of accepting humanity's terms. One by one, lights indicating agreement began to appear. First from species who had suffered the worst losses at Olympus Station. Then from those who had run the projections and seen their own doom in the numbers. Finally, even the most stubborn holdouts activated their approval. The vote was unanimous. The Council accepts humanity's terms, Sejvara announced formally. Earth will be granted full membership with all associated rights and responsibilities. Sergeant Park nodded and replaced her helmet. The United Earth government thanks the Council for its wisdom. Ambassador Chin will arrive within the week to formalize the agreement. I'm sure you'll find her agreeable to work with. Several representatives shuddered. If their ambassador was anything like their Marines, Council sessions were about to become much more interesting. As the session concluded and representatives began to disperse, Vex-ADH found himself walking alongside Sergeant Park. May I ask you something, Sergeant? Of course, Commander. The kill ratios, will they continue to climb? Park was quiet for a moment. That depends entirely on the galaxy, Commander. If our allies and neighbors work with us in peace, you'll find humans to be generous friends. We'll share our knowledge, our resources, our strength. Your soldiers will train with our Marines and become forces to be reckoned with themselves. And if someone breaks the peace, then they'll learn why every human Marine memorizes the names of the colonists who died in the early attacks. They'll learn why we train harder than any sane species would consider necessary. They'll learn why we develop kill ratios that your computers thought were impossible. She stopped at the entrance to the Council chamber, turning to face him fully. You asked if the ratios will continue to climb. The honest answer? We hope they never have to. But if they do, she shrugged, a gesture made ominous by the armor she wore. We've only shown you what standard Marines can do. Pray you never have to see what happens when humanity truly goes to war. With that, she walked away, leaving Vex-ADH with the chilling realization that everything they had witnessed, the devastating battles, the impossible kill ratios, the total transformation of military doctrine, had been humanity holding back. The galaxy had gained a new member of the Council. Whether that would prove to be salvation or doom remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the age of human isolation was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the months that followed, humanity integrated into galactic society with surprising grace. Their merchants proved as adaptable as their marines, quickly establishing trade networks that benefited all parties. Their scientists shared discoveries that advanced multiple fields of study. Their diplomats negotiated with a combination of soft words and the unspoken promise of marine intervention if agreements were violated. The marine exchange program expanded rapidly. Species that had once viewed humans as enemies now sent their best soldiers to train on Earth. They returned transformed, carrying with them not just tactical knowledge, but the human warrior ethos. The idea that every soldier, regardless of rank, could make decisions. That adaptation and improvisation were more valuable than rigid doctrine. That the bond between warriors transcended species. Some observers noted with alarm that kill ratios for species trained by humans began to climb dramatically. A Quelari unit that had undergone marine training recorded a 30-to-1 ratio in a border skirmish. Kronak warriors who had seemed brutish learned to combine their strength with human tactics, becoming even more formidable. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. The galaxy had always operated on the principle that might made right, that the strong dominated the weak. Humans introduced a different concept: the strong protected the weak. Marine units began appearing at humanitarian crises, using their combat efficiency to save lives rather than take them. The same soldiers who could eliminate a room full of hostiles with surgical precision were equally capable of organizing refugee camps, distributing medical supplies, and establishing defensive perimeters around vulnerable populations. This shift in philosophy spread like wildfire among younger members of various species. The idea that military might could be used for protection rather than domination was revolutionary. Applications to join military forces trained by humans exceeded all projections. A year after humanity joined the Council, a new crisis emerged. The Devourers, a nomadic species from beyond the galaxy's edge, launched an invasion. They had consumed 3-star systems before the Council could react, their bioorganic ships resistant to conventional weapons. The Council turned to its newest member for help. Admiral Chun, Earth's representative, stood before the emergency session. The Devourers represent a threat to all life in the galaxy. Humanity proposes a joint response. Our Marines will lead a combined force drawn from all Council species. We'll share our tactics, our technology, and our determination. Together, we'll show these invaders that this galaxy protects its own. The force that assembled was unlike anything seen before. Human Marines fought alongside Kronak warriors, Silithai scouts, Zorvian tacticians, and soldiers from every Council species. The kill ratios from that campaign became legendary, not because of human superiority, but because humans had taught the galaxy to fight as one. The Devourers were repelled in a series of battles that military historians would study for generations. But, more importantly, the campaign forged bonds between species that diplomacy alone never could have achieved. Warriors who bled together developed a respect that transcended old prejudices. 5 years after the vote that brought humanity into the Council, Commander Vex-88 stood in the same chamber where he had first presented those terrifying kill ratios. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood representatives from every military force in Council space, all wearing a small pin, the symbol of the Galactic Defense Corps, trained and organized along human military principles. The galaxy faces many threats, Vex-88 announced. But together, we are stronger than any enemy. The humans taught us that. They showed us that the greatest strength isn't in domination, but in unity, in protecting those who cannot protect themselves, in standing together against the darkness. He paused, looking at the human section of the Council. They also taught us that the most terrifying warrior is one who fights not for conquest, but for family. And that's what we've become. One galactic family. The applause that followed would have seemed impossible just years before. Former enemies standing together, united by bonds forged in battle and tempered by peace. In her office on Earth, Colonel Sarah Chun, retired, watched the council session with satisfaction. The kill ratios that had once terrified the galaxy had become a teaching tool, a demonstration of what training and determination could achieve. But more than that, they had become unnecessary. Because when the entire galaxy fought with the skill and determination of human Marines, there were no enemies left who could stand against them. The numbers that had once spelled doom for the Galactic Council had instead become their salvation. And, in the end, that was the most human thing of all, turning fear into hope, enemies into allies, and warriors into protectors. The kill ratios remained in the military databases, a reminder of what humanity was capable of, but they gathered dust and used, and hopefully unnecessary, because the galaxy had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach. The best warriors are those who make war unnecessary. And somewhere in the void, Marine training continued. Not because humanity expected war, but because they had learned that strength preserved peace better than any treaty. The galaxy slept soundly, protected by warriors who had mastered the art of death so completely that they rarely needed to demonstrate it. The age of conquest was over. The age of protection had begun. And the kill ratios? They became legend, whispered about in military academies across the galaxy. Not as a threat, but as a promise that those who stood with humanity would never stand alone. The calculations that had once terrified the War Council had saved them all.